Welcome to Jack of All Trades 505. This is your host, Joseph. If this is your first time here, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. This project is an image that I found online. I actually found it in Pinterest. From what I know, this is a composite image of two different paintings. The top painting is by an artist by the name of Adam Smith, painted in 2009. The bottom painting is painted by I don't know if the same artist or a different artist, but I believe this painting's title is called A Dispute Over Territory. But it is a digital composite of two different paintings combined into one image. And I liked the image so much that I decided I wanted to try to paint it myself. I am utilizing a different method than what I have used in the past. Actually using a projector, a little mini projector that I am able to display, the image from a file and display it onto my surface. Can come in handy working on vehicles and whatnot. The only thing I will say about this is that you have to find a level stand or base for it to project to, and it's only got a range of about 3 feet to achieve this size of image. This is a 16 by 20 Canson illustration board. Where I am using Createx illustration colors. Now what you see me here doing the image, turning on and off, I was verifying all of my marks, and basically I just trace out the major landmarks, the different shapes and shadows, highlights. If there's solid lines, I indicate those with a solid line, and if it's an area of shadow, I will usually use small hash marks to indicate that area. Here you just seen that I went over the entire image with a kneaded eraser rolled up to lighten up the pencil marks as light as possible. I did not fully erase the pencil marks, but I did lighten them up quite a bit so that they're almost invisible. The main tool that I'm using here for the background is a stranded speaker wire that is usually used for amplifiers in vehicles, and I basically stripped the outer housing of this wire and separated all the strands till they were separated, and I actually combed through them till they, with a very stiff comb, combed through the wires until they spread out like hair. And then the cool thing about this wire is that you can shape it, and if however you bend it and shape it, it'll keep that shape. And if you spray through the long strands, it gives you the appearance of, the darker shades with the highlights of strands, of the individual strands that were blocked off. And you can work with this in different layers over and over again. Another way that I utilize this tool is that I bunch it up and spray near the end of the wires to create that jagged short hair look that bordered the outside. Obviously I always try to start with the background and work my way forward. I'm spraying in. This is sepia. That is the main color used for the background and for the fur. I did add a couple of drops of moss green to this mixture, just to give it that, because there's already green in sepia. This is just adding a little bit more to it, just because I could see a slightly greener tint to the brown in the reference photo. The other color that I'm using here is the illustration black and Payne's gray. Now I utilize, rather than using one airbrush and having to clean it out constantly for each color, I utilize several airbrushes at the same time. I have up to 12 airbrushes at my disposal that I can load up with various different colors, and I will just switch back and forth between those colors. Now, I don't load a lot of paint in each of those airbrushes, 3 to 4 drops maybe of each color, and diluted about 1 to 1 with distilled water, just to keep it somewhat viable, and it helps to actually break down the paint a little bit so that it's easier to erase. I do mainly utilize the AFMAT electric eraser with a Sun Dolphin seed rubber eraser insert. This is a Japanese product that is a combination of rubber and sand, so it is more aggressive than your traditional pencil eraser. That, with the combination of the electric eraser, the electric motion or the circular motion, it does erase much better than it would otherwise. Here again, I'm always I will utilize the sepia to establish the main shapes, and then I will go over those shapes and darken them up with the illustration black when needed, especially in the eyes, because the eyes are very kind of small and dark and recessed. So that is kind of the process that I use for those. I should mention that the airbrushes that I use in this painting are in Iwata Custom Micron 0.18 millimeter. I use a Fengda BD181, which is a 0.25 millimeter airbrush, and a Master Airbrush G48, which is a 0.2 millimeter airbrush. And I do actually use the Krios PS771 later on in the airbrush, in the painting as well, and that is a 0.18 millimeter as well. So again, these airbrushes, if you modify them, work with them, they are fully capable of achieving the detail that you want. So I do have the sepia loaded in the Fengda. I have the illustration loaded in the Micron, and the G48 is a small 2-3 milliliter cup that I use for rapid color changes, just because it's simpler and quicker for me to change out those colors that I only need a drop or two of color, rather than load a whole airbrush with those colors. So that's kind of my quick change airbrush. So I do use that, and sometimes I'll switch it up. If like at one point I will run out of black in the Micron, and rather than load it with pure black again, I load it with Payne's gray, just because at that point I didn't have any loaded in the G48, and I had something else loaded in there and I needed it. And so again, these are just they're just tools. Don't think of any airbrush as special. Pretty much, they all can do the same thing. It's all in the way that you use the airbrush and how you control the airbrush, and if you practice with it. So again, here just spraying the edges of the speaker wire to create the, I guess, folds or layer to his fur, spraying those with the illustration black, and then going over the top of those with sepia. Now here you see me trying to erase away kind of in the center. I wasn't supposed to bring down the color that far, so I did try to erase back into it, but not too successfully, not as much as I had wanted. I did lighten it up, but it really wasn't as light as I would have liked. Again, here you see that I just go through pulling out highlights after laying in the different layers of black and sepia. Now I've decided to switch my attention to the mouth and the bottom lip. I initially I'm initially right here kind of shaping it out with the Payne's Gray using the G48, and then I will switch to the Micron with the illustration black to further establish the kind of darkest shapes that you see. I did darken up the nose, underneath the nose, and started to work off of that shape. I do utilize Drew Blair Skin Texture number 5 a lot. Again, like I said, this is probably my number one stencil that I use for every airbrushing. I do make my own freehand shields using my Cricut. There are different tutorials on how to create your own SVGs by converting PNG image file to an SVG, and then you can load that into your Cricut and create your own stencils. So look it up. There's plenty of information online on different techniques and different tools and things that you can do out there. The Sun Dolphin eraser, that was a tip from the art workshop. He had suggested that eraser to me. I purchased it from eBay as a direct buy from Japan, but I think it's worth it. Like I said, it's very, very effective for erasing back down to the substrate without actually scratching the surface. So again, this has kind of become my favorite tool for erasing techniques. Here I'm just blocking in the darkest shadows that I see in the mouth with the illustration black, and establishing the some of the dark shapes of the trees that are in the background, working off of that bottom edge. I will also use the Payne's Gray to further kind of shade the lips and the mouth, just again because I do see somewhat of a blue tint in the reference photo. It's not pure black or even gray. Payne's Gray is actually becoming one of my favorite colors to use because it does contain that blue element to it, and you can use that with color theory and these transparent colors to achieve different effects. That's the thing, again, why I paint with the illustration paints, just the illustration line, which are transparent, because transparent paints, rather than opaque paints that you lay down a color say white, and then you lay down another color, black, over the top of it, it automatically just uh, covers one color over another. But with transparent paint, depending on how lightly and you spray it in, you can tone and they'll mix and create a grayish color on the paper without you having to mix them in the airbrush. So with any of the colors, they interact with each other. So you will see that I did, spray in some uh, of the Payne's gray uh, into some of the shadow areas in the fur, just because shadows tend to have blue or purple in the shadows. Here for the mountain, I used a torn piece of paper to create the sharp kind of jagged edges shapes of the mountain, and I sprayed in blue violet and Payne's gray to kind of tone it to the level that I wanted. This is really supposed to be like a far off shadow, really far in the distance. I did use a texture stencil to kind of block in some of the shapes and textures into the mountain, and then use the eraser to pull out some of the highlights. Again, I have the pencil marks on the paper, and I'm always trying to be conscious of those markings and not spraying where paint doesn't go. Being very, very careful of my trigger control, so I don't have to use freehand shields or friskets. I just try to be as careful as I can when spraying. Now here you see where I was kind of erasing the silhouette of the second bear figure down at the bottom, and I didn't fully erase back, just because he is brown, and so that overspray that kind of crept into his areas will just eventually blend in. So that's not that big of a concern. But for the bear on the right, you did kind of see that I erased as much back as I could of that overspray of blue, because again, he is primarily brown. But I did leave in just the tiniest little hash marks or specks to emulate like darker tufts of hair, because those are going to be covered up with the sepia, and they'll mix. That blue and green will somewhat mix, but plus the brown, just give it a darker tone, a grayish kind of tone, gray out where they mix with the blue, and you still get your brown and your green. So it's very interesting how color actually interacts using these illustration colors. Again, just kind of darkening it up with some Payne's gray towards the bottom part of the painting. This kind of extends past the reference, and so I kind of had to invent what I was doing there at the bottom. Here I'm using the Drew Blair's texture stencil to kind of block in some of the darker patches of fur that I see in these two bears. And now I'm just going to start fleshing in the different shapes, like the face and the initial little tufts of hair. And again, I'll use the organic edges of the stencil because they're rugged and rough, not smooth, and more organic. Obviously, that's right. He created the stencil to have as many organic edges and shapes that you may encounter. So it really is a Swiss Army knife of stencils. Here I loaded a little bit of Scarlet into the G48 just to tone that tongue little more pinkish. I could have used magenta, I guess, to start off with, but I didn't think about it at the time. So it is a mixture of a red violet and just scarlet. The this again, I'm just using the sepia as the main color, varying the concentration of sepia that I add to this painting, adding more and more tone uh, until I kind of reach about the saturation that I want. Now, when I now I could continue to try to spray in more and more sepia till it gets to the point of black, but at certain points I will just spray in black, or even Payne's gray to darken those shadows under the belly and behind the legs, to get those darker tones. So again, don't be afraid to use black for shadows, but use it very, very sparingly. You don't want to just blast it in black because it does muddy up. It can tend to muddy up a painting. And like I said, I like to use purples and blues for shadows. Payne's gray, like I said, is becoming a very popular color for me. Uh, and again, just using erasers. I don't know if I mentioned it, but I do utilize just a regular stick pencil eraser, graphite eraser. That eraser is not as aggressive as, say, the super aggressive erasers that Drew sells, or the the sun dolphin eraser that I use in the electric. Just because sometimes you want it a little more subtle, a little softer erasing back, and you don't want it so I guess defined. But yeah, again, I just use the speaker wire and the texture stencil to kind of create various lengths of hair and texture, jagged edges, and also utilize freehand. Again, it's kind of difficult. I imagine the original painting was much, much larger uh, than what I'm painting it. Um, so it is kind of difficult to get the the detail that I see in the reference and convey it through the airbrush, onto the surface. That like I said, that's kind of the trick, is to try to recreate what we see in life, and using this tool. But I have, like I said, I've fallen in love with the airbrush 100%. I just can't imagine how I got through life without airbrushing. But now that I have, I do try to airbrush at least an hour every day. Now that I'm in school, it's a little difficult. Sometimes I'm a little worn out and tired, but I still try to airbrush as much as possible, even if it's just dots, lines, dagger strokes. Always, always, always be painting. Always try to keep your skills fresh. Always try to keep your motivation going, and keep going. Here again, went in with some illustration black, kind of tone in some more of the top figure. He needed more shadow under his chin and some separation in the tufts of his fur. And then the bottom bear, he needed some more tone as well. So now I have gone ahead and started to shape in the rock formations that are in the front. I had started with the illustration black in the Micron, but I held back a little bit and just decided to concentrate more on the other, on the other figures. You kind of can tell that there was a break, and when I came back, this is where I had loaded the Krios with a medium gray, which was about 10 drops of white and 2 drops of black, and or maybe not 10, maybe like 6 drops of white and 2 drops of black. But it created this medium gray, which I used to kind of just shape in or render in the shapes of the rocks that are in the foreground. Anywhere that I kind of seen shadow rock shapes. The kind of texture stencil that you see me using right now is actually homemade. It is from taking a heater filament from a furnace, taking the filter and taking some of the filling and ironing it flat with an iron till it becomes one piece, and then it basically used that as a stencil, and it creates that kind of rocky formation kind of shapes, and I used that quite a bit as well. So it's again, use anything, use everything, whatever you can find. Just they're just means to an end. They're tools. They're because honestly, I mean, a lot of these images, a lot of these things that we're trying to create with the airbrush were not created by an airbrush. They were created with traditional brush, and usually, probably much larger. So here, I did go ahead and load more black into the Krios just to get the darker shadows and start to fully render out the shadows and the darker areas. And now I'm going in with the pencil eraser, giving the lighter, softer eraser marks. And now I'm using the electric eraser to get more of the kind of sharper highlights. And here, again, just more shaping and toning of the shadows. And a little more toning in of some of the midground and foreground with G48. And the last little details, highlights, and we are about done. So this is the final product here. This was very fun for joining me. As always, if you like this, please hit the like button, subscribe, and leave a comment on what you'd like to see next time. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time. Bye.